Let's see if this works. You're live. Let's see if this all works. Well, I've got something working, so you know, something's working. Hello. I'm hoping this is working. Is there a debate going on about brew? All is working. That is good. There is a slight latency going on, but I can deal with that. I can deal with latency. So, the only annoying thing is my live chat viewer is deciding not to work at the moment. Yes, now that's working. Hello everyone. Right then, so I have the Iron Brew. Hello Blue Shirt Buddha. Hello Jay Richardson. Hello Nicholas. Hello Gordon. Hello Dave Boonen. Hello California. Hello Wayne. Right then, how are we doing? Hi Richard. Right then. Evening Jay, evening Stephen. How are we all doing? Now, I have to say a big thank you to everyone who's been sharing and tweeting about this sort of thing, because it's been getting a lot more attention than I thought it was going to get, which is why I did the earlier... Hello Stephen. Why I did the earlier video, which you should have all received. Well, it should be up wandering around, and it will be connected into the same system as this. Hello, Perry. Hello, Crandu. Right. So today's topic is, of course, battlecruisers and what were they for. Well, I'm going to start. Go on, Collins. Did the research assistant enjoy his work? The research assistant always enjoys his walk. He's not joining us today. He's downstairs enjoying the garden. Hi, Ian. Hi, Jeff. So today, we're going to be starting off with the Naval War Manual from 1925. Always a fun thing to start off with. But it's quite a critical manual. Jack Ray, your research assistant is big. Yes, he is. He's a full-size standard poodle. Raphael, it's a pleasure to have you. Right, so, as you can see, I'm wearing really the wrong shirt to be discussing battlecruisers. I'm wearing HMS Belfast, but, you know. William Burton, Alex Hunt, I suppose Iron Brew is a little bit like root beer, although I think the root beer I have tasted is a little bit like dandelion and burdock. I have tasted Iron Brew on many occasions. I don't think I've ever compared it to root beer. It is a can of Wells, Richard. So, let's start off with the first distinction. You'll notice when I write battlecruiser, I write it as two words. Hi John, nice for you to join us. The reason I write battlecruiser as two words is because honestly, battlecruisers are a spectrum. Okay? There are battleships on one end of the spectrum. That's the battle end. And there are cruisers, like HMS Belfast, on the other end of the spectrum, which do the pure cruiser job. Now, I think I used the discussion when I was talking about the other day that the battleships are for fighting battles. The battle cruisers are for hoovering up everything else on the sea. So basically, their job is to be big enough, to be powerful enough that anything other than a battleship they can bushwhack if they want to at sea. So they can the ocean for economic warfare. In which case, there is a reason why there is only one power which still has battle cruisers in 1939. All the rest have got fast battleships at best. There is only one power which, as we discussed before, is looking by necessity to have to fight a global war. The rest don't have to. They can afford to concentrate on the Pacific or the Atlantic or the Mediterranean. There is only one nation which is thinking, hang on, we might have to fight and have force to hoover up annoying ships everywhere in the whole world. It's the Royal Navy. So, surprise, surprise, the only navy which has battle cruisers in 1939 is the Royal Navy, with, of course, my favourites. Well, actually, my favourite, HMS Renown. And you can never find, whenever you want Hood, you can never find it. And HMS Hood, pulling a disappearing act. Hood. Renown. Now, Jay Rishan has pointed out the title has it as a single word. Yes, I know, because I have had this argument with YouTube many, many times, and they kept changing it. I'm going to win the argument, though. I am going to win the argument with YouTube. I'm going to win it. But when I use it as a rule, and when I use it everywhere else where I'm writing it, and I don't have to argue with YouTube, it's all two words. Where do large light cruisers lie in the spectrum? Well, the Royal Navy would call them counter-surface raiders, but everyone else would call them surface raiders. As in the Furious and Courageous pre-Reconstruction. That's just nutty. They're definitely at the cruiser end of the battle cruiser spectrum. Definitely at the cruiser end of the battle cruiser spectrum. Lexingtons were battle cruisers more like, yeah. Even Chevy 42. Chevy 42, well, apart from the Congos, which were pretending to be fast battleships. No, the Congos had pretty much turned into fast battleships. In the nicest way, the Congos, and I have their stats sitting around here just in case, I kept this one from the earlier one, gain 4,072 tons. 4,772 tons is what it takes to convert that to that. It is a fast battleship. Not a particularly good fast battleship. If you want a good fast battleship, in concept at least, not in practicality, you're looking at the Iowas and the Iowas, really, and the Queen Elizabeth class. Carl, I'm avoiding that question. Greg, hello. So, the difference is how the Royal Navy looking at these ships. Why are they looking at them so differently? Well, they have a simple reason. But it doesn't actually come to pass in 1925 with that particular, where we're starting. Because if I quickly go to my 1925 War Manual, and I get the pictures out I want, and manage to find the pictures I want, always a fun scenario. Every time. Don't worry. It will be perfectly alright very shortly. So, battleships and battlecruisers. And I'm going to add another picture, just quickly, but it does mean I'm going to disappear. Now, I hope you can all read those. And I will position it so it doesn't cover up your conversation, but it will hide me. So, this all comes from ADM 18666, which is also, and that's the joy of it, is known as the 1925 Royal Navy War Manual. Yes, the Royal Navy produces a war manual, and it does come about. As you can see in this one, the battleship and battlecruiser embody the maximum armament, armor, and mobility which is practical to combine in a single vessel. In the battlecruiser, armament and protection have in some degree been sacrificed to speed. I sort of have the PC working. I sort of have it working. It doesn't particularly like this always, but it does work. It's getting better. In every maritime war, control of sea communications and tradeways has hitherto been exercised by the power which, in addition to prescribing sufficient vessels to exercise this control, has been able to concentrate a battle fleet sufficient to destroy or neutralize several enemy forces. This is the point. The Royal Navy has to control a whole world. It has to control it all. And to do it, it needs both. And it's the sole power which really needs both. The rest can afford to have fast battleships, or something on that end of the spectrum. On the battle-to-cruiser spectrum, they can afford to go the battle end, because it works for them. It works. This is the battle end. This is what works for them, because they want to fight a battle. But for the Royal Navy, they need the cruiser end as well, because, remember, the Royal Navy needs to control all of this, the whole world. And they need to take out your trade in the whole world. So, they need the cruiser. Okay. Battlecruiser does give better search results, Jeff. I see. Raphael, see and hear you finally have your PC working. Sort of. I do agree the phone is a far better camera image, which is why I use it for recording the movies. But if I do this way, I can put up pictures and all sorts of things for you to see like I just did. So I have to accept lesser camera quality in return for being able to give you a better image to look at. So, you know, basically, this is the point when you're talking about cruisers. The Royal Navy has to control all of that world. Let's answer questions. These newts. The Deutschlands were battleships. The Germans tried to use everything as a commerce raider. That is, the Deutschlands were not battleships. They were heavy cruisers. They were actually called heavy cruisers. Hence, they were called Panzerschiff. A battleship is called a Schlachterschiff, and a battleship is basically Scharnhorst and Gneisenau and anything more. If you're the Royal Navy, you call them battlecruisers, though, because for the Royal Navy at this point, the difference between a battleship and a battlecruiser is whether a battlecruiser is a large ship which is orientated on trade war, on the economic commerce warfare. A battleship is orientated on fighting the battles, fighting fleet actions. So one is lots of heavy armor, and one is lots of fuel and lots of range and speed. Hood, okay. Alex Hunt, why does Japan using the Congos as carrier escorts make them BBs? The KM employing the Scharnhorst as convoy raiders made them BBs, but GM using Hood and R for surface action makes them BCs. Well, now, here's the thing. The RN are building them as BCs. That's what they orient them towards, and their structure, their reconstructions are all towards making them better battlecruisers for the 1930s. However, in World War II, the Royal Navy occasionally runs short of battleships and occasionally finds in situations like when you're dealing with the Denmark Strait, where you're going with what you have available. And what you have available is a battleship which hasn't yet worked up properly, and a battlecruiser which hasn't gone through reconstruction, which was scheduled for 1939. And so that happens. And that's not good. The Hood was definitely, Stephen White, you could argue Hood was towards this battle end, Schleppy 42. No, it's definitely towards the cruiser end. It looks big and impressive, so it looks like it's towards the battle end, but trust me, it's all orientated around being the cruiser end. And that's one of the reasons why I think, personally, what happened was, reading the facts, that with the Hood, a very interesting shell came in, hit the water, and got angled through the water, and ends up blowing up or piercing the hull near that point where the torpedo bulge just doesn't cover a bit of the 4-inch ammunition locker. But, you know, the ammunition magazine, but it's fun time. Stephen White, sort of like Force H coming up from the Med to reinforce Hunt for the Bismarck. Yes, pretty much, but that doesn't mean you're using your battlecruiser as a battleship. That means you're using it for trade protection to hunt down the ships which are coming in. Yes, the fact the ship you're hunting down is a battleship is a problem, but if you have your carrier group and they get caught unaware at night without anything, they are screwed. Whereas a battlecruiser carrier force is quite an effective formation. And that's what I'm going to get into. Hood was definitely towards the battle end. Perron, Schlachtenschiff, not Schlachtenschiff. I know, sorry. My girlfriend, my wonderful girlfriend has tried to get me better at German. So far, I'm better at Iron Brew drinking than I am German. Okay? I'm trying, though. I'm trying to get better. Jeff Beeler, Kirk was one possible London Treaty battleship design and could fight an upgraded Italian dreadnought. Yeah, it could, but I wouldn't want to be in it. 401, Hood also had an angled 12-inch belt, whereas QE and R had 13-inch belts. Yes, there's all sorts of things that Hood has which are different than the others. In fact, actually, I would argue Renown and Repulse are actually stronger than Hood. Because Renown and Repulse are based on R-class battleship designs, which were adapted under Jackie Fisher to become battlecruisers, making them as close to battlecruiser as it could, and then they were still rebuilt. In fact, Renown, as I showed, gets specifically mentioned in a treaty, so that because she's being reconstructed even as the war ends, the World War I ends. Sheppy 42, you could probably argue the Deutschlands were battlecruisers, but definitely not battleships. No, you couldn't even argue they're battlecruisers. You really can't. Ian Coombs. Hi, Ian. What's a pocket battleship? A pocket battleship is a newspaper term for a Deutschland-class heavy cruiser. They really are not pocket battleships, but it sounds cool to say you're engaging a pocket battleship than a heavy cruiser. And it sounds better for the press reasons. Straw 401, the Congos were also intended to form the fast wing of the Japanese fleet in the same way that battlecruisers was used at Jutland. Yeah, but sort of differently. Plagiar, where does KG-5 fit? 30 years older ships like New Mexico and Texas have more guns. We're getting into the battleship questions. That's good. Right, so, if I've missed any questions, I will try and work back to them. But, to move on with the battlecruisers. So in the 1920s and 1930s, what the Royal Navy are looking at with the battlecruisers is very different. As we've seen, the Royal Navy has various things going on about the battlecruisers, but the battlecruisers are always around commercial protection. But as exercises go on, what you get happen, and I will show some exercises about this in a minute, is you get the Royal Navy keeps trying to practice a force where you have Vice Admiral battlecruisers, takes Rear Admiral aircraft carriers and his aircraft carriers, and usually a couple of destroyer flotillas, or usually including some tribals, when they come about in the late 1930s exercises, and goes nuts. And the whole reason for being is that this is the Royal Navy starting to think about Far East deployments. Okay? Battle cruisers and carriers can move faster than the battleships. They can. And if you combine them with some fast light cruisers, i.e. HMS Belfast and the other towns, and some fast destroyers, i.e. tribals, these very pretty things, you get a fast group which can be deployed rapidly to the Far East. Now, why does the Royal Navy prefer to deploy battle cruisers than battleships rapidly to the Far East? When I said before, they prefer to deploy cruisers. Right, so their theory is they're deploying this force. They're deploying it to try and head off escalation. And the trouble is, you can deploy battleships only so quickly. But if you can get your battle cruisers out there, then they can reinforce the cruisers on their commerce rating if necessary, especially the backup of carriers, and then you've got a hunter-killer group going out there trying to hoover up Japanese commerce, which, if it's got through the Singapore Straits in time, is going to stop the Japanese being able to swing in and block the Singapore Straits before the battle fleet gets through, and then that group can meet up with the battle fleet, and then you've got a nice full fleet action ready for the Japanese, which will track them down one night. The Royal Navy's plan for all things. Track down the Peterson at night and bash them on the head. Okay. Crandu Publications. What do you make of the 1929 battle cruisers? I prefer not to make anything of them. Honestly, I'm not that keen on them, but they're trying to be too much in the center, and they can't go either way. 401, KGVs and Vanguard were originally referred to as battlecruisers in design documents. There are all sorts of documents which go around with them. As far as Stanley Goodall talks about them, he always considers them battleships, and so does Chatfield and Henderson. Actually, Henderson might have liked some battle cruisers rather than battleships, but he would have probably gone for fast battleships. Very, very fast battleships. Jeff Beeler, for the US, battle cruisers were to provide operational recon, and they realized carriers and zeppelins could do it way better, so they converted 2 battle cruisers to carriers. Not really. For the US, the battle cruiser was designed as this sort of fast recon, and you don't really need a battle cruiser to do recon. Actually, your light cruisers and your carriers will do it far better than your battle cruisers, which will inevitably get drawn into a fight and are so big they will get seen. And also, then once you have them, and especially once you have a treaty limiting your numbers of them, if your plan is to fight a big battle, then a battle cruiser is not what you want. As I said, for the Japanese Navy, for the US Navy, battle cruisers are not that useful tools, because they are talking about fighting a major battle. They're talking about the big battle. Whereas for the Royal Navy, which is thinking about fighting a global war, for them a battle cruiser actually makes a sensible addition. A battle cruiser, and remember, especially once you have the treaties come in, it's an either or. You can either have a battle cruiser or a battleship. You can't have battle cruisers as well as your battleships. Well, I suppose the Royal Navy do, but you have a limited tonnage, and you can either use it for battleships or for battleships and battle cruisers. And you have to make a decision. Which way are you going to go? And the Royal Navy goes, we're going to keep 3 battle cruisers. We're going to keep 3 battle cruisers. If they'd wanted more, Nelson and Rodney could have been very different, but they didn't. They wanted some strong battleships because they knew they needed them for fighting actual battles. But they also knew they needed the battle cruisers, and they do start practicing what these ships are for. So start to think battle cruisers, especially as we go into the 1930s, start to think of them as the fast flying wing of the Royal Navy, the Rapid Global Response Force. Combined with aircraft carriers, combined with fast destroyers from the Mediterranean Fleet and fast cruisers from the Mediterranean Fleet, surging out to the Far East to support the Far East. And that's why you have a Vice Admiral battle cruisers, a Rear Admiral aircraft carriers, why they sort of work together. And usually they would turn up with another Rear Admiral, probably maybe the Rear Admiral destroyers, but probably a cruiser squadron Rear Admiral, and that would form, along with the Admiral already out in the Far East, the core nucleus of the China Station Far East Fleet, especially once you combine with the cruisers from the Australian Division, the New Zealand Division, and, you know, all the other services that are out there. So the Australian Navy, actually, is by that point. Once you combine them with the Indian Ocean Squadron coming in, all this sort of force together, you have quite a considerable battle force. And yes, the battlecruisers can't stand up to a fight with the battleships, but that isn't what they're there for. They are there as the rapid response to try and cause the Japanese to sort of back down as part of a graduated naval diplomatic response, but also as part of a right then. So you're going to have no trade very quickly. And the interesting thing is let's say you follow the battle plan through, Royal Navy goes through, manage to fight the Japanese at night. Let's say they win. And they're now doing the whole plan of basically surrounding Japan, blockading it until it surrenders. That was basically the broad strokes British plan. You would leave some carriers out there, you'd leave the battlecruisers out there. You bring the battle fleet home to watch the Italians and the Germans and go, we just beat the Japanese, who are a hell of a lot bigger and better than you guys are. Do you really want to take us on? That is the sort of the idea going through. And battlecruisers are important for that. So you have to consider the battlecruisers are, in many ways, the Royal Navy's largest cruisers rather than part of the battle fleet. And that's what you have to start thinking of them as the largest cruisers. What is interesting is as it goes on, of course, the Royal Navy starts building town-class large light cruisers. Is if they had gone through and built more heavy cruisers, especially once they got through the treaty limitations, I doubt they'd have built more battle cruisers, because they'd have had the larger cruiser role would have been fulfilled by a heavier cruiser, and the numbers of the cruiser role would have been filled by the light cruisers. But, you know, it's at the time, this is what the battle cruisers are. They are the large flying wing of the Royal Navy. The large, flying as in flying around the world force. Okay. Raphael 1981. So would the reconstruction have shifted Hood more to the battle or the cruiser end? I think, like Renown, she'd have kept her broadly at the cruiser end, but with enough of the battle in her that she could actually have a fighting chance. An interesting thing, of course, is a whole battle where Renown does take on Scharnhorst and Gneisenau and actually does scare them off. Now, as I make a joke about Glowworm, I make a joke about her being pissed off, Mama Bear, and all these things, but my advice is that, you know, in the nicest way, that shouldn't have worked. But it was in terrible weather, and while their systems weren't working to try and get them an accurate range, so that's why they were really sort of withdrawing, because they couldn't seem to get hits on her. Her systems were getting hits. She was getting target hits. Deutschlands were too slow to be a battle cruiser, for one thing. Jeff Beeler, yeah. J. Richardson, stronger post-refit and Box of Doom, or pre-refit no Box of Doom? Post-refit, they would have been stronger. Okay. Alex Hunt, Hood has a 12-inch belt, plus ours have 8 to 10-inch belt. What am I missing that makes the ours closer to battleships? They are based on the Revenge-class battleship hull, and they have a lot of extra structuring and layering within them. So their subdivision and everything is far heavier and far denser than the Hoods. It's still not as dense as the battleships, but it means actually structurally they can take far more work, and that's one of the interesting things. Renown goes through 2 major reconstructions in her life. I have them written down here. And what happens to them? That's Hood. Yeah. Renown has a full reconstruction from June 1922 to September 1926. No, July 1926. And September 1936 to August 19 1939, Renown has a full reconstruction. They are massive. She's massively rebuilt. So, you know, these are the things. These ships have had a full reconstruction. They can, in many ways, have it done easier. One of the reasons why Renown seems to be taken in for reconstruction earlier than Hood, despite being the older ship and having been reconstruction before, is actually they think her hull and her structure is more capable of taking reconstruction. So if they have to make errors while doing it, they prefer to make it done on a Renown and then put their practice of their best practice into the Hood. Richard Hughes, do a collaboration with MHV. I'm not sure who MHV is. Steve White, USNBB's standard speed, standard turner is battlecruiser can't maneuver as well in a battle line. Not really, no. Battlecruiser is designed not for a battle line. A battlecruiser is designed to be out on its, probably engaging large surface raiders or cruisers. Hello, Jim. Thank you for that, and thank you for all the super chats and all the things, and thank you for watching the advertisements. All that money goes towards research, although I'm still not quite sure how much you get paid for the advertisements. Me and YouTube are still sort of working that one out. Okay. Ooh. Ian Carr, Renown was ordered not to intercept Bismarck. Yes, she was ordered to not intercept Bismarck, like the tribal class destroyers were ordered to not track down Bismarck. If Renown had managed to get close enough, she could justify it. Trust me, Renown would have tried to intercept Bismarck. I think Bismarck probably would have won, but I'm not quite sure, because Renown was a tough old girl. In many ways, she's just as deserving as the fighting ship status as Warspite is, and Renown does some really spectacular feats in her career. She's a very special ship. And I think Vian, if he'd had his choice of flagship when he was put in the carrier, in charge of the carrier group, would have preferred to have Renown sent out to him, or given to him. But, you know, I know it's mentioned at some point. Matt Warwick, Renown and Repulse are in a totally different class to Hood, and not in a good way. Renown is mentioned in the treaty because she's getting a new 9-inch belt. Repulse has already been upgraded. Yes and no. Yes, they're getting a new belt, but also Renown's reconstruction takes a quite... And as I said, Hood is the status symbol, but it's interesting, when I'm looking at it, I'm reading things like this thing, you know, and other reports and reports in the archives. And it's interesting, I'm drawing my impression of these cruisers and their construction quality from the constructors. And the constructors seem to be far more impressed with Renown and Repulse than they are with Hood. Especially as time goes on. And, you know, that's what I'm getting from. These notes. Which tribal class destroyer had the least successful career? Technically, you've got to say HMS Gurkha because she gets sunk first. But she does get sunk charging an air attack, so she gains points for style. And she stops any of the convoy being attacked by the aircraft, so... But technically, she is the first to get sunk. Scene 1. Concept reach out ahead of the line or rushing to interception. Keep BCs out of the line. Hood should have been paired with KGV and Prince of Wales with Rodney. Possibly. Although myself, I'd have preferred King George V and Prince of Wales together to tackle Bismarck, and Rodney and Hood also there. Because if you could have had all four in the same spot, that would have been really good. Then Bismarck would have been really unhappy. Or just a flotilla of destroyers along as well would have made the life interesting. Ian Carr, was a ship the size of HMS Hood, status notwithstanding, the best choice, or would a further Renown have been better for the RN? Look, the Admiral class battle cruisers are a lovely idea. But it is interesting that Hood is the only one that's built, and this is the only one that's built in a time when they could get the money through and could get it stuff. I think that tells you what you need to think about it, in that she is a beautiful status ship, and as battle cruiser, she is supreme. But again, you have a lot of tonnage tied up in a battle cruiser. And, you know, I have a soft spot for Hood, but I still think Renown and Repulse would have been a better one if you'd been able to have a couple more of them and managed to get it so you could have 16 ships instead of 15, and had 4 Renown Repulse. Let's go for the good old HMS Reliant. For hasn't read this, this is the mythical 4th battlecruiser of the Royal Navy, when, you know, from this book, HMS Reliant. And, you know, you'd had Renown, Repulse, Reliant, let's call it Renegade. Yeah, that'd have been quite nice, but you didn't, so you have to go with what you have. Hi, Stefano. Airmon, what do you know about the F2, F3 battlecruisers? Well, that's the interesting thing. The Royal Navy has a design strategy which is going on, which is looking at battlecruisers which are basically becoming fast battleships. And then they have a global war strategy which is moving them more and more towards commerce raiding and economic warfare. You know, one of the interesting things is I look at those designs and then I look at what a Special Service Squadron does in 1923 and 1924. And if the Royal Navy is looking at battlecruisers as fast battleships, they should be using them as fast battleships in terms of their diplomacy. In which case, they should be going to visit heavy on the American ports, heavy on the Japanese ports, heavy on the European ports. But these ships don't. They go through the South Atlantic, they go through the Indian Ocean, they go through the Southern and Central Pacific. Yes, they visit San Francisco, and they go through the Panama Canal, but they spend more time in Canada than they do in America, visiting both Vancouver and Halifax. So, you know, the Royal Navy's battle cruisers are about economic warfare. I'm sorry, they are. And when they get used outside of economic warfare, that's when they get into trouble. The Battle of the Falklands is what gives people the wrong impression, because people look at the Battle of the Falklands and they hear a battle and they think it's, you know, it shows how these battle cruisers are capable of battle. When actually the Battle of the Falklands is one of those distant operations where you're against a very small force, a very limited force, which has managed to get out there mostly because it's been cut off from everywhere else in the world by naval diplomacy. And, you know, the Royal Navy mop it up. Okay. Steppy 42. The Japanese used the Congos as fast heavies. All their other warships, apart from Hms, were a bit on the slow side. Pretty much, yes. The Japanese tended to build their warships very heavy on the armor, very light on the engines. And it was actually what they found with the lovely Congos is that they could keep their speed up by just putting in more efficient engines. And I love the Congos. They, like most of the ships this time, they tend to use a combination where, right, you have coal-powered burners, but they have fuel oil sprayed into the coal furnace to make it really hot. So we've got coal and oil, because that's going to make it massively hot. And then if we run out of oil, it'll still run. So, you know, as long as you've got coal supplies, you can still run your ships. They won't be as efficient, they won't be as capable, but you can still run your ships. They convert them to oil-powered, and that gives them the extra speed. But it also means that the Japanese Navy is more strategically dependent upon oil supplies. So this is the thing, you know, you always have to be thinking about your supplies. 401. The Lexingtons were designed long before the treaties. The large size would be useful for the long range and high seakeeping speed for strategic scouting in the Pacific. Possibly, but I would have to have the original bow design before their conversion to carriers, even in the Pacific. I have a feeling you'd have found your forward deck constantly covered in water. Stephen White, Hood-like ships vulnerable like Lexington, longer hull, can't do tight turns to avoid torpedoes. Yeah, but the whole point was they'd be going so fast you wouldn't get a torpedo line run-up, and any destroyer which is likely to be launching a torpedo is likely to be sunk first by 15-inch fire. That's their plan. Ground Duty publications. How much did the RN learn from the experiences of Lion and Indefatigable, Queen Mary and Invincible? Did they learn to interrupt the powder train? They did. They were, you know... The RN had a lot of safety measures in place. One of the interesting things about their aircraft carriers, and one of the reasons Royal Navy aircraft carriers take longer to build than other nations, is because of the sheer amount of layers of protection stuck in on the fuel lines to stop fuel getting down. So the Royal Navy does a lot of work to try and do this. This is why the Hood is, in my opinion, such a lucky shot for the Bismarck. 6 inches either way, and you probably would have had Hood severely damaged, but not destroyed, and still firing. What happens then is a different matter, because if Hood's just damaged, well, Prince of Wales comes steaming up. Instead of having its sort of confidence knocked out, it's now got to protect the Hood, because the Hood's damaged. So suddenly you've got a crew who might be not as well trained as they could be, might not be as up to standard as they would like to be in a sort of brand new battleship, but they've got a huge motivation because they've got to protect their mates. And that's a whole different ballgame. But as it was, they destroyed it, and it takes some of the confidence out of the Prince of Wales. It really does. It also leads to Tribal class destroyers experiencing homicidal rage, but we'll leave that to one side. In car, ratio of BB to BBC had changed considerably from World War I to World War II, especially if R class are considered obsolete. Yes, but I don't necessarily consider the R class obsolete. They are obsolete, but the thing is, the Royal Navy... Look. Interesting point. If the Royal Navy, and I'm using Mr. Jordan's book here, which, as I've said before, is very good, but I don't necessarily agree with everything in it, but it is very good. RN ships to be scrapped of age. Royal Sovereign, Revenge, Resolution, Royal Oak were all supposed to be scrapped between 1936, 37 and 38. So, originally it was 20 years. Yes, treaties extend that, so they don't. But if the Royal Navy had really wanted to push diplomatically for it, they could, and really wanted to, they could have probably said, we need to ditch these ships. Because the Americans wouldn't have minded replacing some of their older ships more recently, and quicker. And, you know, the thing was, the Japanese and Americans would have been quite happy on side. So, I do not treat the R-class as being completely useless, because whilst that might be the vogue, and whilst they might well have had their issues, they were still they still had the guns they did, and they still had the capabilities they did. They were still pretty tough ships. They just weren't in the full flush of youth, and they really hadn't been reconstructed enough to be so. Again, Queen Elizabeth class have proved far more practical for reconstruction than the R class, which is why they're doing better in World War II, despite being the older ships. Jeff Beeler, the RN seems to have taken a step back from Battlefleet emphasis based on World War I experience, unlike US and Japan. After all, what does a decisive Battle of Jutland actually get you in overall terms? Yes, but also this was the Royal Navy looking at World War I in a calculating term and going, will this happen again? In the nicest way, it won't. And then they're looking at fighting a big battle. Okay, so you're really saying what will happen is we will go for a massive battle and manage to have the same size forces, or even just slightly superior numbers of forces, or slightly less, in the Pacific, in a battle. It's probably not going to be. It's going to be a different circumstance. It's going to be different. So how are you going to deal with this? And in those circumstances, what are your battle cruisers for? Do you want to get rid of them? Because that's the thing. You could have just got rid of them. Royal Navy could have turned around in the Treaty of Washington and gone, we're going to get rid of all our battle cruisers and maintain some of the battleships. The older battleships. But we'll have to replace them when time comes. The Royal Navy could have done that option, but it didn't. Because battlecruisers, I know people like to say it was Jellicoe and Beatty and they No. A, there's a third Sea Lord involved, and B, Jellicoe and Beatty. The reason Jellicoe wants the battlecruisers, despite him not being that keen on them after their performance in many battles, was for the commerce warfare, for the global economic warfare. And this is the thing: the Royal Navy was thinking about a global economic war. In which case, they would need battlecruisers because they would need to track down surface raiders, which were too big for them to engage otherwise, and they would need them to be surface raiders if they needed them in the Pacific. Okay. There are lots of questions, and the questions are coming in very fast, so if I don't keep up, you know why. It's fanciful. To me, battlecruisers were always ships that could overwhelmingly against other cruisers. The use of them on the main battle line was always an error. Yep, correct. Cherishan, would Hood got a box of Doom if she survived a sea refit? Probably an adapted box of Doom. There are many forms of boxes of Dooms. Grandu Publications, Force A1. Omahas were part of the same concept of the Lexicons, the South Dakotas, and the Flash Deck Destroyers. 35-knot scouts and 21-knot battleships. Yeah, you know, it's good to have a 35 knots. Jim Chrisham, very helpful. RN had a global job to do, answer many questions. It is the thing. The Royal Navy are thinking, when they're looking at battlecruisers, they're thinking about the global scenario. They're thinking about my favourite map, from ADM 1162827. I do enjoy this map. And I would be flashing it up on the screen, but, you know, it's up there, is there, so it's quicker to get to. They are really critical. They are really, really useful. Military history visualized. I'd be happy to if they wanted to. I probably should speak to Drakenfeld. Actually, on the subject of Drakenfeld, while I remember it, the podcast, first episode, comes out tomorrow. First episode goes live tomorrow. We recorded the second episode today, which is going to have a special announcement in it. And the third episode, of course, I'll be recording next week. We'll be recording next week. So that's the podcast of me, Drac, and Jamie talking about current naval affairs. And if you can imagine, I'm pitching it as like the Grand Tour team down a pub having a conversation about naval warfare. Just the trouble is, two of us are drinking Iron Brew and Lilt, which probably has more of a effect on us than alcohol would. Greg Sowski, might be fun and easier to do one with military aviation history on carrier naval aircraft. He's doing a PhD at King's. Yeah, I might have to track him down. That's where I did my PhD. Yeah, most people are. I have to say, I think I have seen military history visualized again, and I realize very quickly there are a lot of people who do a very good work of the sort of visualization and the extremely structured approach. And I thought, frankly, that's not really my niche or my style, so I can try and replicate that and it won't look that good, or I can be my way and see if people like it. And so that's what I've done. Cherishan, HMS Gurkha, living up to her name. Yes, she did. She did very well. Inca, was the late HMS Hood rebuilt to have been like Renown, and do you think she would have then survived Bismarck? Let's camp forward the rebuilds a couple of years. So let's say Renown goes hers 2 years earlier, and then Hood goes in for hers. Yes, I think she does survive. I think it makes it unlike... There are all sorts of little modifications. Hood had been refitted between the wars. You know, don't think... Hood has... Let's see, I've got the list here. Hood has refits, quite major refits in 1921, 1926, 1927, 1924. No, that's 1929 to 31, 1932. Hood has several major refits. Hood is not the same Hood which came out of World War I by World War II. She has been modified quite heavily in many, many regards. These notes, an alternative battle of Denmark Strait with 3 Admiral-class battlecruisers would be a scary prospect for the Bismarck, especially if it annoys the 2 others by blowing up Hood. Yeah. Interesting example, actually. One exercise in 1935 has Hood, I think, versus Repulse. Or I'm not sure if it's the Repulse or Renown. Anyway, they end up ramming each other because the umpires are saying they're missing each other. This is the type of aggression breeded into the Royal Navy commanders. And okay, at one point, what's interesting is a court-martial removes the captain of the R-class afterwards and says it was their fault. And then Admiralty reinstates him, going, no, they're being aggressive. That's what we want our officers to be. So it was very different than the modern world. When you think about it, nowadays it would be the Admiralty removing someone. Well, possibly not in Britain, but in America, if we look at examples, it would definitely be removing them. Current publications. Hood was redesigned so often between 1916 and 1919. I get the impression that they just wanted the slip cleared so they could start on 1921s. More than likely. Really was. She really was redesigned a lot. Engaging strategy. Did no multi-purpose fast BB in excess of Queen Elizabeth fast that could do both the BB and BC roles emerge in the RN until argue the KGV simply because of the treaties? I'd say Lion class more than King George V's. KGVs are really not that great if you want to do the fast battleship role. I would say the Lions would have been it. And honestly, the G3s look like you're about to refight Jutland. They are really heavy on the armour. And the trouble is, okay, armour is necessary as part of a battleship's role because it has to be able to take that pounding. But if you want to be a fast battleship, you've got to first grow in length, which the Congos do, and then gain horsepower, and a lot of horsepower. And remember, the amount of horsepower you get per ton decreases. So to get enough horsepower to push to 35 plus knots, you are talking about devoting a lot of tonnage to power plant, to engines, to fuel. And that's the problem with the KGV thieves. They don't devote enough. So I think it's the Lions more likely. KGVs, no. Because it's not getting up to the speed to do the fast battleship role. It's if you want to really emulate a battlecruiser, you have to be able to maintain the speed for a long time. And that requires actually more horsepower and more machinery because you have to be able to maintain it almost as a cruising function. Matt Warwick, regarding the Admirals, I have to agree. Hood's sisters were cancelled because the war was over. The follow-on battlecruisers were even more better armed towards the battle end. Yeah, I can see the point you're making, and I have to concede they were more, but in terms of their armouring. But in terms of the way they were structuring the ship, I'd say they're more towards the cruiser end. They were trying to get the best of both worlds. They were trying to use the extended cruiser-style structure internally, but give it more of the battle armour. I don't think it would have worked. That's why I'm as negative as I am on the G3s. Others do, and that's the great thing about history. We can have different opinions, and that's good. In fact, Matt, thank you for being here, because honestly, if anyone knows more about the battlecruisers on Twitter or anything now than you, I'd be surprised. So really, you should be sitting here and I should be sitting there asking you different questions. But, no. Instead, you're torturing me. Grace Sassy, yeah. Emperor 1733. What post-World War II thinking was there regarding the use of battleships and battlecruisers in the Royal Navy, if any, taking their scrappings into account? Okay. Post-World War II, if we're going to jump, that is a bit of a jump, but actually, not really. The reason Vanguard is kept around is because of the Stverdov class and because of what do you use the battleships for. And eventually the Royal Navy gets them, decides to go down and get rid of it because it's looking at, okay, what do we have the need for the battleship for in a pared down force? When you're keeping a massively large force, like the Royal Navy had been doing, it would have been sensible to keep battleships and aircraft carriers, probably not battlecruisers. But once you start reducing the size of the Navy, you have to justify both, requires you justifying a lot of extras. Whereas a battleship only does the fire support mission of an aircraft carrier and sea control, but not as well. An aircraft carrier has a lot longer reach. So despite the battleship being far more efficient at the sea control and at the killing other ships, the aircraft carrier is far longer range and its adaptability because you can adapt its air grip to everything. So you keep the aircraft carrier. If you've been going to keep both, because you've been building a larger fleet, you'd have to expect the Royal Navy would have probably gone with a lot of combined task groups where you had a battleship along with your aircraft carriers, both air support, but also as this sort of other principal asset to combine a task group around and build a task group around. This thing which can do fighting and expected to sort of be used as sort of Battle of Matapan concept. I'm not sure how long they lasted for, but it would have been interesting. Jerison, if you had choice, Second World War, Royal Navy, you can exchange battle cruisers for battleships or vice versa. Would you? If I could exchange the battlecruisers for Lion battleships, yeah, I'd exchange them. If I could exchange the Revenge class for some very heavily upgraded admirals, I might do that as well. But if it's just a one-for-one change with what I've already got, I'd probably keep the format. I'd probably keep it as I had. Raphael 1981, Dr. Clark, you talk about how Iran was in theory preparing correctly for a Pacific War, so what went wrong strategically to lead to Singapore Island? Failure to appease Germany? No. What went wrong was, it was the worst case scenario for the Pacific War. You had the war start with Germany first of all, which meant you moved Mediterranean assets to help out with the Atlantic, and you moved other assets to help out in the sort of, you stretched the Mediterranean. Then the Italians came in, so you need to bring in other assets from the Indian Ocean and the Far East to help in the Mediterranean. And then you do the Emperor has no clothes routine of sending 2 battleships out to the Far East. And that is the worst thing you can do. Okay, naval diplomacy, it's all or nothing. And if you're the big power, it's especially all or nothing. You either shot with overwhelming force and go, I'm here. Do you really want to fight me? Do you really? Or you shot with cruisers in this period, light cruisers. Because basically you're going, you really are going to take me on? No, I don't think so now. No, I'm just sending a light cruiser along and they will tell you what to do. But you aren't going to deal with me, okay? Because you're just not worth my time. You either have to go the almost dismissive put-down approach of, we're so confident here, we can send a light cruiser. What the Royal Navy did at Tsingtao in January 1939. HMS Birmingham walks in, 3 heavy cruisers, all the force of the Japanese facilities at Tsingtao, and she has a sloop with her as backup. She should be completely outnumbered and scared of them. Walks in, no, I'm taking her this merchant ship with me. Boom, done. HMS Liverpool off the coast of Japan. The Asamaru incident. Again, the same thing. The moment you send a battleship, 2 battleships, is the moment you're admitting that you cannot send any more, and that's when you're... Basically, what they should have done is they should have deployed a slightly larger force but put it in the Indian Ocean, so it could be called through to help out the Mediterranean if needed, but it was also there ready to respond to from the Indian Ocean to the Far East if needed, and have concentrated their forces in the Indian Ocean and just sent cruisers through to the Far East. But that's a whole one I'm getting into in June, how to refight the Battle of Naya, what if. Jeff Wheeler, I think for rebuilding, I think it was overreaching to give a plan to give Hood 5.25 inch. I think she would have probably had the 4.5s. She would have the 4.5s. Matt Watt, battlecruisers correctly, explicitly had a role with the battle fleet, though. We can see this in the comments of Long, Beatty, and Jellicoe. Yes, they did, but, and this is the point, when you're dealing with Jellicoe, Beatty, and Long, that is at the beginning of the interwar period, and this is specifically why I started in 1925. Because the thinking in 1918, 1919 is different in the early 1920s than it is by the time you get later in the interwar period. As the it's as the time evolves. You start off with, okay, we've got a fast wing reconnaissance of the fleet, but then you have aircraft carriers show up. You have light cruisers. Suddenly, that reconnaissance role. Why are we using a big battleship cruiser for this when we can be using other things? What else do we need to use the battle cruisers for? What else can they be used for? What are they viable for? And the thing is, what do we really need them for? And the British decide we do really need them for the commerce warfare role. Ian Greenley, painting a battlecruiser model while learning about battlecruisers. That is a good thing to do. Jeff Beeler, KGVs were their own fast wing. Yeah. I wouldn't like to keep the KGVs up at full speed for as long as for not long enough to be a fast wing. They're more comfortable battleships. Hi Night Heron Production. I've just lost some of the things. Wow, the questions sometimes zoom past. Sheppy 42. On Prince of Wales also had to be confident with hard to be confident with 2 out of 10 14-inch guns working. I agreed, but the scenario sort of gets a bit different when you've got the Hood still there, still firing, even if it is damaged. Does the concentration happen on the Prince of Wales then? Does she keep operating her guns? All sorts of things happen. Alex Hunt, wasn't the whole point of the R-class battleships to be obsolete second-line battleships at construction? No. They were supposed to be battleships. The R-class was supposed to be built. They were built to a more conventional design than the Queen Elizabeth, which were built previous to them. And they were built to that conventional design because they were worried about oil supplies, surprise, surprise, and getting the stuff in. Steve White, how much larger did 8-inch cruisers, how much did the larger cruisers take over from the battlecruiser duties? It depends on Navy. If you're talking the US Navy, they take them over pretty much completely. If you're talking about the Royal Navy, the Far East definitely becomes an 8-inch cruiser world. Jeff Beeler, post-World War II, the Town class. Yes, they became the big ships backed by carriers. Ian Greenley, would you consider it a reasonable argument to consider the Deutschland class as battlecruisers? No. Been over this. They are heavy cruisers at best. At Golden Eagle. At Dr. Alex Clark, why did the Royal Navy build as many as 6 different types of guns in the 13.5-inch, 14-inch category in World War I? Okay, well, Drac has been over this quite successfully, but I'm quite happy to go around. The Royal Navy didn't really want that many guns, but when you have a load of other nations building ships in your yard that you take over, which is, by the way, what the joyous thing is, Article 7 in the Washington Treaty. In the event of a contracting power being engaged in war, such power shall not use as a vessel any vessel of war which may be under construction with its jurisdiction for any other power, or which may be constructed with its jurisdiction for another power not delivered. For starters, this is not worth the paper it's written on. Secondly, the Royal Navy actually breaks that rule in World War II. There are some destroyers which are borrowed. And thirdly, that is the Royal Navy taking up ships which were being built for other nations in their shipyards is why they end up with so many different systems, and it was just impossible to read. You'd have had to basically rebuild the ships to change the weapons to a standardized one, so you just went with what they had. You know, that's the whole thing. Schleppy42, I personally consider that a reasonable argument on the Deutschland's The Good Doctor doesn't seem to agree. No, I don't. Michael Rose, so the podcast is coming out on my birthday. Wonderful. Yes, the podcast is tomorrow. Happy birthday for tomorrow, Michael, then. Grace Starsky. And Dr. Clark, which one of you is Clarkson? You have to ask. The more interesting question is, which one is the hamster? These notes, what's your opinion on the Venezuelan frigate that sunk itself by ramming a cruise ship? Do not ram icebreakers. Deeks25, where can we find a podcast? They are on the SimSec website. Okay, Centre for International Maritime Security has them up, and they will be tweeting them out. Hi, Night Aaron Production. Hi, Dr. Clark. How do you see Hood being used if she survives Bismarck Agent, regardless of whether she gets a modernisation or just up-to-date repair? She would probably be modernised as part of the up-to-date repair. I see her being a big part of the British Pacific Fleet. Actually, that would be somewhere where she'd be really useful as a very fast escort for the carrier group. She might have even been given to Vian as his flagship. Or probably Fraser would have taken her as he also liked her. And, yeah, she would have been a flagship out for the British Pacific Fleet. Night Heron Production would even be worth the resources by the time she came back to service, that presumably being around 1944. Yes, she would have been worth it, because you cannot build battleships that quickly, and the Royal Navy needs them. In a nice way, if they get her back into service in 1944, she's also there possibly for D-Day. You need these big guns, and if you're talking about possibly invading Japan, again, you're going to need fire support. So anything which has got 15-inch guns is worth preserving and maintaining. Google at Dr. Clark, what about the Alaska class? Why were they not battlecruisers? Okay, Alaska class are pretty much battlecruisers, but the US Navy never considers them that, and they are never really used as that. They're used as heavy cruisers, so that's what we have to respect and treat them as. And at a certain point, you're describing ships by what they're used. As I said, a battle cruiser is a cruiser which can battle anything smaller than it. By that intention, most cruisers are battle cruisers. But, you know, there's nothing really built bigger than it than a battleship. And that's the whole point. The battle cruiser fits between the battleship and the cruisers as the ship in that spectrum between the two. Then you have the battleships at one end and the cruisers at the other end. And the battle cruiser fits on that spectrum. And whether it fits on the cruiser end or the battle end depends on the design emphasis. Autumn Eagle, Autumn Yule Nesher. Basically, the battlecruiser is a Corbettian strategy versus the Mahanian one. The classic question of how was it? Who was your teacher? Yep, mine was Dr. Michael Partridge, followed by Professor Andrew Lambert. Both have a certain had a certain inclination on that strategy. I have to say, my own inclination prior to that, from having read both quite a lot of Mahan and quite a lot of Corbett, had led me into a similar perspective, because Mahan does fit, but the trouble is the big battles is not where sea control or sea ends. If you get command and the control of the seas, that's great, but that's only half the equation of naval war. The other one is what you're going to use it for. Golden Eagle, at Dr. Clark. In my opinion, Congos were still battlecruisers. You are allowed your opinion. But both the Japanese and I agree that they were fast battleships. Honestly, it's a growth of 4,772 tons. That's like a sixth of her weight gone up. She's one husky lady of a battlecruiser for her design. And she only grows. The thing is, she grows by 4,072 tons, but only gets 5 more meters in length and actually gets 5 more meters in breadth, in beam. So she gets fatter and doesn't get much longer. I'd have said if she got about 10 to 15 meters longer, rather than 5 meters, then she might still be a battlecruiser. Because again, it's the hull shape as well. You know, are you designed for long-range, high-speed cruising? She's not. Look at the counties. That's the classic cruiser hull, the town class, the classic cruiser hull, the shape, the profile. And then you look at the Congos, and pre-refit, they've got that shape. Post-refit, they haven't. They're squatted. They're more battleship. At Douglas Clark, Sheppy 42 at Douglas Clark, have we discussed why Strasbourg and Dunkirk aren't battlecruisers if no other navies had battlecruisers at the start of World War II? Well, I did in my little video, but I'm quite happy to go again. They are battleships. Okay? Strasbourg and Dunkirk are very cute, lovely, as I do make the point, and very modern in design. Fast battleships. What exercise was this that I've been discussing? I've been discussing 1935s, and so far I haven't brought up the 1937 exercises. I've got them there. I've talked about the 1927 exercises, the 1920 exercise in the previous paper, but I've got them here as well, ready to come if I need them, and the 1935s are the big ones. Golden Eagle, at Dr. Clark, what about Deutschland class? In my opinion, I used to consider them pocket battle cruisers. Now I refer to them as armoured cruisers. I would actually accept armoured cruisers for them. I don't consider them battleships or battle cruisers, but I do think they are definitely armoured cruisers. Maybe, yeah, I'll take that. In car, how much would a stern have added to the speed of the battlecruisers? Once you're onto that size, probably not a lot, but you never know. Ian Greenlee's got the Iowa figures. I was trying to remember them, but couldn't remember off the top of my head. Iowa, 10,000 tons to gain 6 knots over the South Dakotas, just like a battlecruiser, but not one. Due to the maintenance of the thick armor, maintenance of the thick armor and everything. That's what you're talking about. To maintain high speed, you are talking about a huge amount of weight, a huge investment. It is colossal. Blacksmith, what's with the air raid siren? I'm not sure, I can't hear one. Dunkirk and Strasbourg were small, fast battleships in concept, scaled up to make the Recluse. Could fight old Italian battleships and eat heavy cruisers. Yeah, basically, that's what they were. Ian Greenlee, worst battle cruisers, Furious, Glorious, Courageous, but what was the best? I'd say if you're going for the best battle cruiser that's designed as a battle cruiser, and this is going to get me into trouble with Matt because I know which one he would prefer, but I'm going to stick with Renown. I'm sorry, especially once she's post-reconstruction. Meters on them and all sorts of things being put on them in the interwar period. It's not enough, but they're still putting in more than others are. Okay, at Golden Eagle, Dr. Thomas Clark, was Hood going to be upgraded to fast battleship status? Okay, look, if they had done a post-treaty reconstruction on her, and that's what her 1939 would have been, and if she'd gone in for reconstruction and she'd been brought home to go into reconstruction, then maybe she could have been turned into a fast battleship rather than a battlecruiser. I'm not sure. It depends how far they went with the upgrading, but they do. Thank you, Matt. Now, Banham, look at some of the other nations' ships regarding in 1939. The RN got some wrong, but we're ahead of most others. Yeah, as I just said. Jeff Beeler. Hood did not have the base structure to receive the armor to be a fast battleship. That's the problem. Because they were built on Revenge class designs and adapted Revenge class designs, Renown and Repulse had the base structure that they could have more armor fitted far easier. So they could have been more potentially turned into fast battleships than Hood in many respects. It's the cruiser versus the battle structure, the internal structure. Basically, imagine your ship design is a honeycomb. It's made up of lots of little, cells. On a battleship, those cells are much smaller proportionally than a cruiser, because it saves weight internally. So when you're talking about a battlecruiser, if you want to tell which end of the spectrum it's coming from, you look at how big proportionally the cells are inside. Eamon, after the declaration of war, what should the 4C have done? Well, they couldn't do it. Once they're there, you can't withdraw. That's 300 years of heritage. They're not going to withdraw. So they did what they'd had to do. Banham, in particular, when the RN have had so many big exercises where air power turns out to be extremely important, I don't think the argument of being better than the sum is valid given the expense. Yes, but, and this is the point Banham have to make, the Royal Navy were fitting anti-aircraft guns and systems to their ships, or as many of them as they could, as much of them as they had available. Remember, half the problems that the Royal Navy has in outfitting destroyers and frigates and other ships in World War II is the sheer production number available of the weapon systems. They delay things. So the reason the Royal Navy sometimes doesn't have more fitted, especially in the late 1930s, is because the need for them, they kept pace with the need. So the need for them is up here, the production's up here. So so they could either refit ships up to the level which they needed to be, but then they couldn't have refitted them all, or they could refit as many as they could, as best they could, and that's what they went with, to give each ship the best chance, and try and go for the task force option. Golden Eagle, Dr. Clark, Renown really lived up to her name, didn't she? Yes, she did. Night Heron production. For anyone who wants it, I'll post an old newsreel featuring HMS Renown in dry dock in the wake of 1936 Hood collision at the end of the stream with Dr. Clark's approval of course. Oh, please do! Please do! That is a beautiful, as I said, I wasn't sure if it was Repulse or Renown that she had the tete-a-tete with. And of course, Renown, after that collision, basically goes into her major refit. Yay, she gets the major refit out of it. Golden Eagle, Dr. Clark, why did the Lion class take so long? I feel it's kind of stupid to start all over when you get a new idea. In nicest way, the Lion class take as long as they do because the Royal Navy wants to build them, but it's actually having to space the building. And that's why they don't get that. They sort of get into trouble. And Matt Rorick, at Banham, the RN had an integrated approach to AA, and its ships in 1939 had more AA than pretty much everyone else. Sure, some assumptions were wrong, but the RN wasn't slacking AA. And you see my earlier point about they were trying to put in as much as they could, but like all these things, you only have so much being produced. And again, paying the money to scale up production is something you can do under total war scenarios. But in peacetime, even when war looks to be round the corner, the Treasury tends to go no. Since Francis wrong, modern destroyers are in many respects rather fragile. Remember the damaged RN ships during the Cold Wars? Yeah, modern ships are fragile, but if you look at it internally, they usually have pretty good internal subdivision, so that's where their strength. Jehbila Drakis the hamster, I would say. I'm not commenting. But that would make Jamie Captain Slow, and that would be cruel. Ian Greenley, any similar incidents to Warspite, going up a fjord and sinking a destroyer flotilla, throwing a Terrier into a barrel of... Look, they all have these sort of things going on, and in the nicest way, you didn't just have Warspite on her own, she did have tribal class destroyers with her, and some other regular destroyers. And it was arguably the tribals which were even more vicious. The Warspite was mainly there to go, look guys, you need to calm down now. You do not need to ram yourselves ashore to chase the Germans when they've got into land. The army will be coming to Narvik soon enough. You don't need to do that. Calm down, boys. Calm down. Calm down. Eskimo, stop reversing towards the beach. Stop it. Stop it. Stop. And provide, of course, also most importantly, air scouting, thanks to her swordfish biplane. Her swordfish float plane. Steve White, this day and age, is there any a ship with BC type duties, show the flag and yet capable of projecting impressive power but not a full capital ship like, say, carriers? Interestingly enough, I was having this discussion today as part of our recording of bilge pumps, the next episode, and the one that's going to come out next week. And I have to say, I think it's probably the Zumwalt class. Probably the Zumwalts are the closest. You know, in potential to being this sort of this present ship. As for Renown chasing ships up fjords, no, she never gets to do that, but she does do other things. Steve White, this day and age, is there done that one? Ian Green, Congo began as a battlecruiser, very similar to Tiger, then she got really fat, pretty much. Gone Eagle, why did the Royal Navy not just use standard issue guns for export ships? Because the buyer, the customer's always right, and the customer wanted different guns. Perrin, well, apart from the Congos, which were pretending to be fast battleships, no, they are fast BBs. They are fast BBs. They are not battlecruisers anymore. Okay. Deeks 25. Weren't the Dunkirks designed to counter the Deutschlands, though? Yeah, anti-commerce cruiser. Actually, they were designed to counter the Italians more than the Germans, and then Germans came along and they thought, yeah, we'll tag that one or roll onto them as well. Chevy 42, Perrin, I only said they were pretending to be fast battleships because their armour wasn't really enough to be part of the battle line. They could have done okay. They'd have got slammed, but they could have done okay. It could be my laptop fan. It could be. But it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to manage to work that out. But it does have fun. It could be that's rather than a siren, I'm not sure. I don't really listen to these back because, in the nicest way, as much as I love chatting with you, I don't like watching myself. It is bad enough when I have to edit the videos. Yeah, it's kind of, the fan bearings are going. The fan is a few years old and probably full of dust. I haven't cleaned it out in the last couple of months. Dr. Gonning, Dr. Simon Clark, I would argue sacrifice missile destroyers to keep Vanguard in service. Yeah, I think no one was going to do that. Janeworth, Dr. Clark, the Congos gained a lot of weight, but no increase in armour apart from some concrete. Not very useful as seen at Guadalcanal. To an extent, yes, but concrete's still concrete. It's like the Royal Navy has water for armour in its torpedo bulges. It works quite well. According to the stats, everything's running okay on terms of the computer hard drive and everything. So we're going to hope down there. Could the R-Class BBs, in car, could the R-Class BB have been updated as the 1939 rebuilt Renown? Yes, they could have been, eventually, if they'd wanted to, but they'd probably replace them with the KGVs and the Lions. The Lions were supposed to replace them. That's a talk. Chevy 42, do you have any thoughts on Nagatos? Too much Congo love in here. They're battleships. They're okay, but they're battleships. Ian Greenley, British battleship turret production 1939 was 7. Could be 10 if they refurbished the Harlan Wall factory. Pretty much. But to refurbish the factory, you'd have to stop it working. That's the problem. You have to take the factory offline to refurbish it, so you're going to lose that. And Hart X-ray. How would the Lexington-class battlecruisers fare if they stuck with that role, battlecruisers, and not pick a fight with battleships? They'd have done okay as battlecruisers versus battlecruisers. They'd have probably ended up both killing each other. Badholm, how come the RN ended up with so many different types of small guns? 104mm, 130mm, 120mm, and 133mm. I am thinking of secondary armament of the BC and B in conjunction with DDs. Again, it's the different periods in the triangle. They are trying to stabilise on the 4.5 inch, but they're also looking at the 5.25 because that's superior for AA. And the 4.7 inch is lovely because that's been into war years, and then they've had the 4 inch for the NTA. So basically you have the 4 inch coming along the 4.7 inch as your traditional destroyer weapons for your anti-air and your anti-ship. And then the 4.5 inch comes along as your, this is going to solve our problems, combine the two together, yay! And it works. It's sort of in between two, has a good enough bearings, but it means you have all three in production. And while they're all in production, you might as well use them all because, honestly, they're all in production, and that's what you need. So if you were going to settle on one, you needed to settle on one and have managed the conversion before World War II began. The Royal Navy was trying to settle on the 4.5 inch, but Henderson's estimates were it was going to take till about 1944 to do so. So he was expecting it to, he was starting work on introducing that standardization in 1936, and he was reckoning it was going to take 8 years to get around to it. You're dealing with a huge navy to convert. Okay. Night Harrier production, unconventional armor, Royal Navy, water and torpedo bulges, IJN concrete. What did the French use? Old baguettes? Actually, what the Royal Navy did was the reason they used water was because the water didn't count towards the treaty tonnage. Under the standard tonnage, the water didn't count. So Royal Navy using water inside its bulges was a very good way of giving yourself armor and extending it and actually using something quite useful as armor without it counting towards your treaty limitations. In Carl, why did the RN stop using Portsmouth and Devonport for capital shipbuilding after World War I? Because they weren't building enough capital ships. It's quite a simple thing. You're not building enough, so you stop doing it. And you keep them for cruiser production and these things, and then you put the cost of having keeping the really massive facilities designed for cruiser, designed for battleship that can do battleship construction in the civilian market because they can get going building liners and large merchant ships. Ian Greenley, Super Tribal 5.25 inches. No, that's called the Dido class. No, we didn't. CY, Battle Squadron 6 with US BBs at Scala Flow was coal-fired, requested due to all oil going to the Queen Elizabeth class. Yeah, pretty much. Disfrontal, don't forget having a whole lot of ammo on one type helps keep guns around because the guns are one expensive for the ammo is okay. Yeah, that's true. Oh, good Lord, I think I've reached the bottom. I'm not sure. If I've missed questions, tell me, and I will go back to them. But I think I have reached the bottom now. I think I have managed to get pace with the questions. Okay. It's like if it were freshwater, it'd even help buoyancy and you could drink it. Yeah, but it's very rarely freshwater. Usually it was seawater, ballast water, often mixed with other things. I think at one point they considered using them as their firefighting mains. Ian Greenley, I joined 30 minutes in and the stream has only just caught up. Okay, I shouldn't. Going to look. I'm going to look. How long have I been broadcasting for and how long did it take me to catch up? Oh my. There have been a lot of questions. In my defense, there have been a lot of questions. I love you all, but there have been a lot of questions. Right then. Tis Francis, would you agree that the Kirov missile cruiser is a terrible idea? Not if you're the Russians. It's a terrible idea if you're the Americans, but it's a good idea if you're the Russians. If you want to make a ship which can destabilize your opponent's tight budget without causing yourself too much trouble, the Kirovs are brilliant. They basically turn up. They'll go, do you really want to take a missile the size of a bus heading at you? No. So they work. They work for the Russians. Night Heron Production. Not battlecruiser question, but what were the plans for the Iron Duke if it hadn't been bombed at Scapa? Is there anything it could have done military? Was help from the Bismarck incident? Not really. The Iron Duke by this point was completely... Theoretically, you could have rebuilt it if you wanted to put on losses and got it working and reconstructed it, but in reality, probably not. It would have depended. If the Royal Navy had lost a lot of battle ships, or had decided that it really needed an extra aircraft carrier, I suppose it could have possibly converted it, but that would have been very, very difficult. And in the end, they'd have probably preferred to just build a carrier. It'd probably been easier. The only thing you have it is if you decide to activate it and try and get everything working. But it had been used as a training ship and other things and deactivated so far. It really wasn't. It was impossible. Jerison, how much tonnage water was carried when? In what ship classes was this used on besides the Nelsons? Pretty much every battleship and aircraft carrier which had bulges had them full of seawater, and we're talking a lot of tonnage. A lot of tonnage. Okay, now the questions are starting to try and get away from me. Night Hen Production. In making Germans believe the RN and BBs hadn't sailed, it was very useful for that one. And Matt Warwick. Water in the bulges is useful because it helps spread the force of a torpedo explosion across a larger amount of inner bulkhead. Not sure if this was factored early in the 1920s, though. Let's put it this way. They did some testings, and they found out it would work in about the end of the First World War. So they've done some testing in the National Physical Laboratory in Twickenham. And so when the Royal Navy gets into the Washington Treaty, they are very good at negotiating. And so the Americans do not realize what the British want them to do. The Americans only work it out in about 1943 when they're told by the Brits, and Admiral King has a consumption fit. There's a whole thing that Admiral Noble writes down about in his diaries in the Church of God about when King finds out of it and the meeting where King is basically calling the British every name under the sun over it. It's brilliant. Oh. Okay. Lionheart X-Ray, do you think Congo battlecruiser would have made a better CV conversion than Kaga? If you converted all four of them to to aircraft carriers, it could have been interesting, but no, probably have to go with the Kaga.
Sheppy 42 from Gone Eagle. Shinano should have been finished as a battleship. Musashi, might as well use her. You know. Frosty, I've read that the French Algeria had coal bunkers even though it used oil-fired boilers. The coal was used as armour, as fuel tonnage did not count against treaty disposal. Correct! That was the other joy. Fuel tonnage didn't count it, so you could use coal, all sorts of things, as armour. It's brilliant fun. Because remember, treaties are all structured around this little thing called standard displacement. And that's just fun. It's the most artificial thing known to mankind, but the British are the ones who managed to get it proposed and come up with it, and it's all written to really benefit them. Matt Warwick, Night Heron into production. Just to add to Dr. Clark's response, there was a brief discussion about returning Iron Duke to frontline service, but I believe it was rejected on cost grounds. Not worth it. Yeah, pretty much. Jeff Beeler, the Congos had more operational range than other Japanese heavy units, hence only they could hit Guadalcanal. The 4 older ships went into reserve until laity because of this. Pretty much. Tis Roswell, I feel it's too many missiles, too big was it in one place, and a good hit wipes out a staggering large amount of your defensive power. It does reduce crew and operation costs. Yes, but also in nicest way, the Soviets, they need something which is a big status ship. And they're not getting aircraft carriers in enough at the time or in enough numbers, so it's a big status ship you can send around the world, and if it gets lost, it's not a big loss. Bad Home, do you think it's more likely that battlecruisers will become a thing again, or will it be gun cruisers? I'm thinking of railguns and such. I'm thinking cruisers more than battle cruisers. I'm not sure whether they'll be called cruisers. I think someone might find a way around them, because cruiser carries these imperial connotations, but I think they'll be cruisers. There again, I call most of them modern escorts I'd classify as cruisers. Jeff Beeler, purpose-built carriers always cheaper and better than conversions. Pretty much, yeah. Ian Carr, HMS Centurion was mocked up as a KGV in North Africa. Was this the only significant use prior to D-Day? There were a few which were mocked up as various things, you know. They did all sorts of stuff. Gordon Collins, why did it take the Americans so long to work out about the water? Because the Americans weren't looking. It's a simple way. It's like the statistic that if you hit water at high speed, it's actually worse for you than hitting land, because of the way it spreads the shock out. And people sort of go, oh, but we dive into the pool and all these things. Yes. But you dive in and you cut the water, you shake your body. If you get your body out of shape and you do, if you think how hard it hurts, if you do a belly flop and you do that really hurts. Well, that's because water's like that. Whereas if you do that on land, you usually just hurt your bum and go, ow. But, you know, water will spread it all out. Unless you think about it. The Americans do get into water and start using it themselves, but they don't realise how much the British have been using it until about 1943. That's the thing. They had been, you know, they do sort of start to use it themselves to sort toward closer to World War II, and they do start to think about it, but they don't really realise how much the British have been using it till that time. Okay. Tis frightful. In defence of the RN, it arguably did need more fuel than water because it did have to travel more than anyone. So it's not a baseless clause. No, it's not a baseless clause. There are good reasons for it. The Royal Navy has very good reasons for it, but it does make use of these clauses to their fullest extent whenever possible. Do crew count towards tonnage? I have a rather macabre idea for anti-torpedo. No, the crew do not count to it, but no. Jeff Beeler, the Japanese lost after the Allies did not offer terms in 1942. They were fighting a 12-month war, win or lose. I would say the Japanese are Greeks, the rest of the world are Romans. And in this scenario, the Japanese think that you fight a battle and then you have a negotiated peace. They think that's what they're aiming for. But honestly, if you look at their previous war experience, what's happened in China, what's happened with Russia, what's happened in their part of World War I, you can see where they've drawn this experience from. In their previous wars, that's what happened. They have won the major battles, managed to win a short war, do all these things, and then have forced people to the negotiating table. They don't realize they're facing a different foe, a different kind of foe, mentally. Which is why I say, you know, other things about what they could have done. Nighthawk production. I know the Hood rebuild intended to have a plane and hangar originally, but 44 wouldn't it be more likely they would retain the long unbroken superstructure and fill it with 40mm? Probably. Actually, Hood had a hangar, well, not a hangar, but had aircraft fitted to her quite regularly. You know, in the 1920s, she has on X and B turrets little flycatchers fitted, 2 single-seater fighters ready to launch. Later on, she has one of those turrets has changed. I think X loses its fighter, B retains its fighter, and they have a catapult fitted with a bigger seaplane, bigger float plane on board. And then they find that they can barely launch it because, unlike the battleships and even some of the smaller cruisers, she's really not that stable for launching them from, so they're basically only using it in the calmest of all weathers, because otherwise it's killing the pilots and the planes. So they take it off her. That's what half her refits are about, fitting and removing and adding aviation facilities. Jerison, do you have any good sources on how King found out the British used water? Noble was the... I just remember reading it in Noble's stuff in the Churchill archives. I'm not sure if it is anywhere else. He has lots of these diaries and notes in the Churchill archives. Admiral Noble is a really interesting guy. Percy Noble. He's nuts as anything, but he's a cool guy to read about. He is very much from the diplomatic side of admirals and a strategic side of admirals, which is why he's at the beginning in 1939. He is the C&C Far East. He's in charge of facing off against the Japanese, and he does quite a good job, mainly by managing the Americans more than the Japanese. Nighthawk production. I've seen the plane catapult at the stern of Hood in 1931 rebuild. I imagine that plane probably came close to floating away at points. They lost what I think it did in Atlantic. Yeah, it was fun. Let's put it this way. It was fun. Golding, Douglas Clark, compared to Navy battleships, the Congos were de facto battlecruisers. If you're going to compare them to battleships, you can possibly classify them as on the cruiser end of the battle cruisers, but it's sort of a little bit. If you, as I said, it's the battle cruiser spectrum, and let's say battleships are firmly here, counties, town class cruisers are down here, Congos are about here. Okay. So, yeah, sort of on the spectrum, but nah, they're much more fast battleships. Sheppy 42, as I say, may have also, I don't think Wasp was seen as a particularly useful carrier. No, she wasn't. She really wasn't. She tries to be. She just tried to be. People try to be effective carriers. It's quite cute sometimes, them trying to be. You know, this is from the 1929 exercise. Hopefully it shows up for you all. And these are the 1929 exercises, which remember I've already discussed as part of the whole discussion with looking at the exercises thing. I noticed the remarks of Vice Admiral commanding Battlecruiser Squadron with regard to the relative value of battlecruisers and fast battleships are generally concurred in. It would appear from records the Blue Advanced Forces honed their reconnaissance at the same time, then similar reconnaissance to Red until later period. It is agreed that more exercises are necessary to obtain data on which to have a decision. It is considered these exercises should be strategical as well as tactical. In this consideration, the design of new battleships is not without significance. The Ersatz-Prussen have a speed of 26 knots and endurance of 10,000 miles at 20 knots, and a main armament of 6 11-inch guns. If this design even approaches success as a standard displacement of 10,000 tons, it may be followed by other nations not necessarily limited to such a tonnage. The necessity for battlecruisers may therefore become more evident in the future, and we should be careful not to lose our present lead in battlecruiser design. Now, battlecruisers are fun, and this is from the 1929 exercises. Remember, after those very nice war game rules are put in. Battlecruisers are always associated, as I've said, with the economic war, with trade protection, with also trade interdiction. That's what they're there for. So that's what you have to ask yourself when you're looking at the Congos, when you're looking at all the other scenario, all the other ships, going, what are they for? Are they for fighting battles with other battleships and other capital ships? Or are they for economic warfare? And if they're for economic warfare, if they're designed to maybe engage with cruisers or smaller, but mostly to fight, mostly to not fight battleships, but they are the size of battleships, they are probably battle cruisers. Okay, right now I've got questions coming up. Matt Warwick, RN Doctrine 1939, where does Hood fit? Battlecruisers at heart, but the RN needs fast battleships, and the KGVs aren't around yet, so do they intend to use her as a BC or a fast battleship? They intend to use her as a battlecruiser. Hood is intended as a battlecruiser, but I think they're forced to use her as a fast battleship. In a global war scenario, they want to have fast battleships, especially if they're fighting Japan. But if they are fighting Germany in 1939-1940 and they've got the Mediterranean, in the Mediterranean and against, in nicest way, in the Mediterranean especially, where you've got the scenario where you've got the air defences you have got to face, and the North Atlantic, where you're going to be doing battleship on battleship action, you actually want the battleships. So Hood gets used as a fast battleship when they wanted her and had been refitting her as a battlecruiser. So, in the nicest way, the Royal Navy have been thinking about battlecruisers in terms of fighting a global war, and then they were forced not to fight a global war to begin with, and then it became a global war, and ooch. Well, it was a global war from the beginning, but it wasn't a global war in terms of needing the battlecruisers to go out. They didn't need to summon a battlecruiser down to the South Atlantic to track down the Graf Spee. They were probably considering it, but they didn't. I think actually was Renown, I think, hurrying down to meet the Graf Spee from memory, but I might be wrong. I'm fairly sure HMS Ark Royal was. I think it was Renown as well, but I'm not sure from memory now. Stephen White, the thing is, were they more BB than cruiser? Good balance, speed, armor? I'd say they're heading towards the battle end of the battlecruiser spectrum. As I said, battlecruisers are a spectrum. Battle cruiser, and the ships fit somewhere along lines. Knighting a Heron production. Could Renown have been retained in non-austerity environment, or was she at the end of her rope, so to speak? I know she was considered grossly overweight by then. She needed to go, basically. In the nicest way, Renown had been originally supposed to go. Renown has been supposed to retire in 1940 at the age of 24. HMS Repulse was supposed to retire in 1939 at the age of 23. Hood in 1941 at the age of 21. So they're all going to get to drinking age, legally, globally, and they're all going to be retired. Since Francis they're not digitalized, are they? Nope, they're not. Which is why I have to do the way I do. Jerushin, what type of explosives did the RN use for propulsion charges and busting charges over time? Lyddite, white fodder, basically all those and more. The Royal Navy got very attracted to various different systems of charges at times, depending on what works best. Night Heron production. Would there be any practical justification given the Soviet cruisers coming up on the horizon at the time? Then they had Vanguard, and they had some other ships kept in mothball status, and then they got rid of them when they didn't need them. Town-class cruisers kept around. HMS Belfast hangs around for a bit. Frosty, in your talk about the RN pre-war in the Pacific, the US cruisers were a threat merchant raiders against Japan in 1959. What did they do, or where were they in 1941? Mostly the town class were off fighting in the Mediterranean and the North Atlantic. That was the trouble. As I said, what happened was the Royal Navy had the war with Germany start first, so you get sections of the Mediterranean fleet going to the Atlantic, and the Mediterranean fleet stretch. Then Italy comes in, so sections of the China Squadron and various forces in the Indian Ocean, all these things have to go into the Mediterranean to back up the Mediterranean fleet, strengthen that up. And they're losing ships. Ships are getting damaged, all sorts of things. And then the Japanese come into the war. And it's just a case of, you. Just when we didn't want it. Dr. I could use that role argument with the Deutschlands. Sheppy 42. You could, but the Deutschlands don't fit that argument, because the Deutschlands, in the nicest way, are nowhere near battleship sized. They're nowhere near that classification. They're not even really heavy cruiser sized in terms of some of their skills. So, in the nicest way, they are what they are. They're cruisers. Armoured cruisers I will accept. I will accept armoured cruisers, but not battleship cruisers. Which would put them on the same yes, but if you're going to put them on the battle cruiser spectrum, they're down here. And honestly, I think if a Deutschland class runs across a county class cruiser, it's got into trouble. Jeff Beeler, Exeter and Mauritius were in the Far East in 1941. Most CAs seem to have been high sea ships. The Japanese getting Vietnam messed things up. Yes, but also, okay, so Exeter is a Type B county class cruiser. So she's not for economic warfare in terms of going offensive on it. She's for defensive economic warfare. Mauritius is a Crown Colony class, which in the nicest way is a stripped down basic version of the Town class, and again, isn't a fully worked up ship. So would you want to send her out solo to go commerce raiding? Probably not. You know, in the nicest way, it's not really what she's for. It's what the towns were for. The towns are much bigger. Sheppy 42. Yeah, there are flaws in calling them battlecruisers, but they do also have very heavy guns for a cruiser. Courageous, Glorious, Furious all had 18-inch guns. All were large, light cruisers, not battlecruisers. Night Heron production. How would you rate Hood in a scenario like the one Renown found herself with Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, since he has tougher ships? Again, it would depend if she had a refit. I think the Renown is a tougher ship because, a nice way, I still don't think, if Scharnhorst and Gneisenau had stood there and fought, I think Renown could have been in serious trouble. The fact she gets some early hits on and she scares them and they run away is a good thing for her. I think in that scenario, if Hood had turned up and Hood had managed to score some early hits, they might have also run away. Because she's got 15-inch guns. That does settle many arguments when you've only got 11-inch guns and it's bearing down on you. And you don't manage to hit it and it's managing to hit you. But I don't think Hood would have scored the same hits to Renown, because I think Renown had been updated and had stuff more. She'd only come out of major refit in August. Okay. Greg Stausey, Dr. Clark, Renown and Ark Royal were the ones shipped into the intel feed to the Graphs Bay. Yes, but they were also on their way down there. They were down there. They were heading down there, and as I said, I think I've done this in the Battle of the River Plate scenario. In my theory, if you've gone to all this trouble of making Ark Royal and Renown pretty much go full speed the whole way down to the South Atlantic, down there. They're not going to be sitting off Montevideo for long in nicest way. I don't think the Grass Bay makes it to the 17th. I think she has a nasty accident in the night. Whatever happens. She would, basically, she'd be a nice lit up target sitting in a harbour, and torpedo bomber or skewer dive bomber goes over, goes bump. Bye-bye. It's Russell. Battleships become obsolete after 45. The advances in other areas just didn't make them as useful, but they're still very expensive. Not so much as... They're still useful, and they're not really obsolete, because they can still do a lot of fighting. And a lot of the capabilities they have, other ships cannot replicate. But the thing is, when you're looking at those capabilities on a broader spectrum, it's an expense to maintain this for its niche capabilities versus the carrier for its broader capabilities. So you go with the carrier. Jeff Beeler, naval warfare is different these days. No role for a big ship with a big crew and big guns. Nice target for missiles. Rail guns and lasers may revolve this around again. We don't know. Shamsaka, Dr. Isaac Clark, with hindsight, what are your thoughts on completing the Admiral class as originally designed with Tiger levels of armour when they were used for trade protection? No. Tuning 343. This is nothing a post-World War II BB can do that a monitor couldn't do better. Both were not built after World War II. Yeah, that's arguably, yes. Ben Grogan, Dr. Clark, did the Japanese use of the Congos inform development of the Iowas? To an extent, definitely the Americans were keeping an idea on the speed and how they're going to use them. Ian Carr, how much quicker would Renown have been in the water at the end of her career? Slower, I think. And yeah, slower she was. Chevy 42, Dr. Clark, yeah, armoured cruiser seems to fit better. I'm honestly just going with the role argument. I don't actually consider them battlecruisers. Please do. Thank you, that's fine. Greg Stadowski, you're safe, Chevy 42. You will be invited back. Greg Stadowski, Dr. Clark, would they bomb her in a neutral port, though? It's the Royal Navy. Outmark incident. They went up in a neutral nation. Asamamaru incident. They took a Japanese cruise liner and held it hostage for about an hour or a couple of hours or so on the high seas, not far from Tokyo. In nicest way, no. They'd do it. And they'd apologise for it afterwards. And also their reason would be, they'd say, but you said it was supposed to leave, and you couldn't enforce it leaving, so we were helping you out. That would have been their argument. It might not have been a good argument, but their Royal Navy have a long policy of it's better to beg forgiveness than ask for permission. And they'd have done it, and then they'd have begged for forgiveness. And in the nicest way, the Uruguayans would probably have gone, well, yes, we're the injured party, that's terrible, da-da-da-da-da, but what are we going to do? It's the British. What can we do? They control the sea. Eamon, so the early I-class battlecruisers are more like commerce raiders, protectors. Yeah, that's what they are. The Lion class and German battlecruisers are more fleet recon screening. Is that correct? Yeah, broadly speaking. So it depends if they're on the battle or the cruiser end of the spectrum, because that's what they are. They're a spectrum inside this between battleships and cruisers. So don't think of it as battlecruiser as a ship. Think of it as a spectrum. That's what you have to deal with. Jeff Beeler, by 1945, Renown was in semi-retirement waiting to see if the Germans wanted to come out, but transferring most of the 4.5s to new carriers. Signed things were winding down for it. Yeah, pretty much. By 1945, yeah. Golden Eagle, Dr. Clark, I still feel battleships have a role today in major navy. Yeah. Battleships to attack Taiwan's coast defenses with, yeah, that can make sense, but they could honestly, they're big, not cruisers, but are cruisers that they're building probably would actually do that as well. Although I do worry about the quality with Chinese ships, because they do seem to have some issues. Shepherd, Dr. No harm in poking at trains of thought to see what sticks. Yes, no harm. No, I enjoy it. This is why I do this, because I get discussions. Go on, Collins. Helping out by trying to scrap metal? Yeah. Gary Carlson, hi. Renown still managed 30 knots on her way home from the East Indies in early 45. Yes, she did. Still could do 30 knots. Which isn't as fast as she theoretically could have done if she'd wanted. In the early days. And she did pull. Both her and Ark Royal were doing 30 plus knots on their way down to the South Atlantic to deal with the Grass Bay. Which is another reason why my point is that they weren't going to go down there and be sitting there. You are not going to send down these strategic assets down there and then they're going to just wait off outside Montevideo for the Grass Bay to come out. Just going to wait there. Royal Navy is going to commit one of its precious fleet carriers, a battle cruiser. Everything is going to wait for the Grass Bay to come out. Yeah. No. Grass Bay would have been sunk. And the Royal Navy, and then the very, very nice ambassador would have gone to the Uruguayans and would have apologized and would have found a way to compensate them and make them feel happy about it. Or at least not feel so upset about it. Tis possible. My favourite action was the West African squadron sailing to Brazil and threatening to level its ports in a series of accidentally broadsides if they didn't stop slavery. Moral and ballsy. Yeah, that's quite often what the Royal Navy does threaten to do. It works very well. Scrub, how many tank class ships could you get for a modern BC? You'd probably be talking about 4 or 5. Probably. BC battlecruisers and battleships were expensive assets. They were many millions of pounds. Night Herald, didn't the hours cost $1 million to operate per day by the Endo? There may be a nice purpose for them, but it is. That's basically the problem. Pager, Iowa versus Montana. I bet my car on Montana. North Carolina versus South Dakota could be interesting though. Interesting. Jeff Beeler, Night Strike on Montevideo. Yeah. Lionheart, were Renown and Ark Royal sharp they want to party? Pretty much. In the nicest way, you either run out and get Renown going, hello, Mr. Grass Bay, you're my lunch. Or you stay in harbour and you get Ark Royal's aircraft going, hello, Mr. Grass Bay, you're our target practice because you're not moving and you're lit up as per rules for being in a neutral port. So you're this nice, bright, illuminated target sitting on its own in the harbour. Way! You know, that's peacetime exercise rules. It's lit up. We can bomb it to Kingdom Come. Sam Trigger, how would battlecruisers and cruisers operate in trade protection? I noticed that cruiser and battlecruiser squadrons in the earliest 20th century had mostly 3 or 4 ships per squadron. Operating independently? Usually, as a rule, they did operate independently and they'd spread out. But they could also be concentrated to operate together. The battlecruisers would probably have had a huge area and they would have been the on-call heavy ship. And that's pretty much what the Royal Navy starts to practice. You have a battlecruiser and a carrier. Am I starting to describe Task Force Ace and a flotilla of destroyers? This sounds like Task Force H, doesn't it? Battlecruiser, carrier, flotilla of destroyers, maybe a couple of extra cruisers if you can find them. But Task Force Ace was this scratch force which was just formed randomly when war began. Yeah, I'm the Queen of Sheba. Basically, the Royal Navy had worked out that for trade protection, you had the carrier to do the wide area searching and finding. But until the actual carrier aircraft got good at killing things and being reliable for killing ships, you had a battlecruiser there as well. So if anyone did cause you trouble, well, they just had the fun coming to them, didn't they? It was just going to be fun times all the day long. Because you'd have aircraft torpedoing you. You'd have destroyers going, howdy. And you'd have a battlecruiser going, bom-diddy-bom-bom-bom-bom. Okay. Deeks 25. Does gun caliber give any indication of how battle or how cruiser a battlecruiser might be? Or is it pure roll
one should consider. Pure role, because often they'll go with whichever gun caliber the battleships that are being built at the time are already having. It's cheaper and it's easier to just build more of the same gun type than to build several different ones. Ben Grogan, Dr. Clark, my notes, it's an argument for return of ship-to-shore support gunnery. Could you not mount several dozen field artillery or an LH these days without specialised ships? You could, but honestly, naval gunfire support has never really gone away. The Royal Navy had learned its lesson in the Falklands War, and very quickly every ship since has had a 4.5, and they're now looking at going to a 5-inch, literally because more people are producing that ammunition type. Strub, if you could get 4 or 5 town class, why not build more of those, so you'd be in more places at once? That's what the Royal Navy pretty much was doing by World War II. That's what they were doing. But you also, when you've got tonnage limitations of how many ships you can build of this type, you build a tonnage limitation and use the tonnage you can. It's like the Travel class destroyers were baby light cruisers. The back pocket cruisers, I call them. You have your battle cruisers as your really massive cruisers. It's the cruisers which are important to the Royal Navy. Pre-CV conversion, I consider the Courageous class as larger cruisers than battle cruisers. Yeah, they are. They're large cruisers, not battle cruisers. Golden Eagle, Dr. Clark, or armoured cruisers. Yeah, armoured cruisers could also work. Ben Grogan, Dr. Clark, to clarify, the argument used to be accuracy rangefinders. PGM shells essentially negate the need. Yeah, but, you know, you can make a PGM shell far more accurate if you can get into the right vicinity. And there are some guns which really do not get into the vicinity. Emin, off topic, but can you talk about naval operations during the Franco-Prussian War? Not today, but I will do another one if you want. If you could tweet that at me, then I'll remember it. Frosty, it's not the Battleship 1920s equivalent to nuclear weapons today. Not everyone can make one. They are very expensive and very hard to counter. Pretty much. It's France's fault. The RN paused most of its battleships still on slipways, focused on destroyers and cruisers. Yep, that's what they did. That's why the Lions take so long and don't get built in the end. Ian Greenley sold the treaty. 15,000 tons with 12 9.2 inches. That's still probably a cruiser, but that's getting on the battleship to cruiser spectrum. That's probably getting at this end of the cruiser, so slightly heading towards the battlecruiser spectrum. Knight's Heron production. You brought up King's reaction to the torpedo bulges and the weight shaving that came from it. Any idea what his reaction when the US was to the USN inferior steel when compared to the Iran? Really not happy. Knight Heron production. I forgot how it balanced out, but I was essentially something like 10 inches of US steel was the strength equivalent of RN 8-inch. Metallurgy is a good thing. Royal Navy enjoy metallurgy. Metallurgy make Royal Navy very happy. Right then. So I'm hungry, and my tea I can smell cooking downstairs because it's in the oven and it's been nicely slow cooked in a casserole in the oven. So I'm going to say, any more questions before we call it an evening? It's France's fault. If you're tearing up the treaty, roll out the 18-inch guns. Yeah, maybe. I prefer the 15-inch. I really do. I think the 18-inch is a lovely gun, but it's very difficult to maneuver and very, very, very weighty turrets. A lot of stress on the ship. 15-inch is easier. Comparison between battleship gun caliber shrapnel versus HE for shore bombardment as AA. HE. Right. Greenley. Iron brew marinade in the casserole? No. One does not waste precious iron brew. One drinks iron brew. One doesn't waste it. It's precious. It's precious. Alright. Vitron. How more capable West's Long Breach CGN-9 as refitted as a Courageous cruiser be compared to Tikronga Ali Burke? Would have had an 8. Yeah, she'd have been good. She'd have been useful. Anyway. She would have been useful, but she's only one member of the class, and always you need more ships. And if you can, the more ships you can have of the same class, the more you can generate ships, and that's useful. Right. So thank you, everyone. Bye bye, and hope to see you on Thursday
which is the 21st, and is Falklands War Command Structures. Take care, chat soon, and hope you enjoyed it. Frosty, on the whole, is not the heavy cruiser created by Treaty a failure? Well, the counties were pretty good. Take care, and hope you enjoyed it. And as I said, if you haven't seen it, the video which I posted a few hours ago, which was on battlecruisers in terms of explaining some of them, is one of the reasons why I sort of post that is to give people a background baseline to go from when we do discussions. I'm going to do some similar thing for the Falklands War. So there's going to produce, and then there's going to be the discussion video. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking that. Thank you as ever to the people who share. Thank you to the people who subscribe. Thank you to the people who have done super chats and all those things. It's very, very kind of you. It's very, very nice of you. And thank you to my patrons. They're all great. It's all amazing, because that stuff, my money is going towards funding research, because basically I can't do my summer job I usually do this year at the moment. I don't know. I might be able to. You never know. COVID-19 might allow me to. But at the moment I can't. So the money I make off this is what's going towards funding my research, instead of my usual summer way of Justin Craig teaching A-level and GCSE students. Well, being their course director. Anyway, thank you very much to everyone. Thank you. Love you all. And we'll chat to you again on Thursday when I'll be talking about the Falklands War. Doodles.